the reality of the whole thing from Northeast Missouri State University was one day, and I was living in it was like a apartment. It was a set of apartments, right? Like 10 apartments connected together in essence. And I had a roommate that I didn't know, didn't really like, right? And so we had basically cordoned off the room.
Right.
This half is your half, this half is my half. The bathroom and the kitchen are common. Right. So there's a big sheet. Right?
Okay.
So one day what happened was the RA or resident advisor came to the door, and he knocked on the door, and I opened the door, and he's like, "Hey, is your roommate here?" And I was like, "I don't think so." And I grabbed the curtain, flipped the curtain open, and dude had left his weed on the Frisbee on the table.
Yeah.
So when I opened up the curtain, the resident advisor saw that, and he went immediately to the cops. Right? So technically what you're talking about, I actually was in front of the judge almost. And I had to make the decision, am I going to keep playing this game, or am I going to go do something that's going to get me somewhere, or am I going to jail? So I basically left school, joined the Navy. My dad said I didn't have the stones to join the Navy because somebody was going to be screaming at me and hating on me for a couple months in boot camp. And I was like, it's the same thing you do to me all the time, so I don't see why you don't think this is going to work. Right? But when I left, here's the funny part of the story. When I actually left, checked into maps, and went to boot camp, the Kirksville, Missouri police visited my house. My dad sent me a letter while I was in boot camp, and he was like, the cops were here looking for you. And I told them you joined the Navy, and they basically went back to Kirksville and, in essence, let you off because you joined the Navy. You took the military route. That's the only thing that kept me from going to jail in Kirksville, Missouri. And I didn't have nothing. I didn't do nothing.
Right.
But I was associated based on my roommate. That was probably most of my football experience was I'll show you. It probably started way back in that stuff with them dudes across the street talking all that noise to me. But in addition to that, what was happening as I got a little bit older was there was the youth football organizations that had kind of started coming to life, right? So you could go play a little football in town, right, as a little kid, get a little flag football going on and get the beginnings of the tackle stuff under control. As a lot of my buddies were going to football practice, they had to walk past my house to get home. And because I couldn't play, they would come and chirp at me, right? Like, we can't wait till we get you on the field. I was like, I can't wait either, right? You guys think you're getting a hand up on me because you're doing all this stuff as a little kid? Little do you know, my dad was an All-American, right? So there was pieces of that puzzle where I was like, you're telling me you can't wait to get a hold of me? I guarantee you I can't wait to get a hold of you. And so our freshman year of football, it all converged, right? So all them cats that had been playing for a couple years, we were all on the field together. And I was like, here we are, gentlemen. It's on now. Well, I'm captain of the football team as a freshman, so I guess you can understand how that went. All right, you guys, they got nothing for me. You get me in the right mindset, there's nobody out here that can stop me.
Dancing on a Volcano. Season 2, so season 1 was kind of interesting. This is kind of a social experiment, and it's many things all at the same time, but one of the things that it is more than anything else is an opportunity to have fun.
For sure.
So in the interest of disclosure and transparency, Dave and I have been friends for 30 years. So one of my longest standing friends, we had the honor and privilege of serving with you in the United States Navy.
Yep.
We met in Millington, Tennessee at Naval Air Station Millington. Actually, we met in a galley.
Yeah.
Right? So sometimes, with these things, I fire off questions early on. Other times I get to tell stories early on. So, Dave and I arrived within a few weeks of each other after basic training. We both had the same, in the Navy, we call it rate.
Yep.
Right. We were both aviation electronics technicians.
Correct.
Right. We were both waiting for our next
for the class
space to
open
up and school to start. So in the Navy, what they did was they sent you TAD with transitional active duty. I think it speaks of temporary active duty. And what TAD was they send you to go do something else temporarily to kind of fill a slot until. So Dave got sent to the galley, and I got sent to the galley. I was already working there for a week or two beforehand with another cat that I knew from Philadelphia. And we were working, actually we were busting suds. We were washing dishes. And then you got a master at arms position. So you were basically standing at the door, making sure that everybody came in was on the legit before they ate. And that was it.
Yeah.
So, we initially we weren't so much fast friends, but what ended up happening was we used to call it the posse. There was a crew of us that we all worked together. There was a good portion of us that worked together in various phases in the galley area. So we were feeding people. and what it was that we would work the hours that we would work. And as soon as we got off, we switched into party mode and we partied like animals.
Yeah, man.
Animals.
Yeah.
Until the next time when we had to go back into work. So basically, the while we were on that schedule, the schedule was show up to work on time, right? Do what they told you to do, and as soon as it was over, we were out in town, just running roughshod over just about anything and everybody. And
Right.
that's where I learned things like that you could buy. So Millington, Tennessee, for what it's worth, is about 30 minutes outside of Memphis. And it was the community outside of the base was, I want to say somewhere between drug-ridden and impoverished. I'm not sure which one it was.
It wasn't pretty.
Right, but that was like where I learned that you could buy a single cigarette. You know what I mean? Like you go up a window and be like, yo, can I get a square?
A square. Like,
a square. I was like,
that.
it'd be like, yo, I just bought 3 squares. I was like, what the fuck's a square? They were like, cigarettes. I was like, wait,
You can buy them.
you can buy it one at a time? They were like, yeah. I was like, wow. I had no idea. So Dave and I, we were pretty fast friends from there on. And what ended up happening is we were a bigger crew. There were probably, the posse was maybe like 10 or 12 deep, roundabout like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it was, the neat thing about it was that it was a cross section of people from all over the country, right? And we all got sandwiched together. And some of us, like 1 or 2 of us, were from the same place. Brad and I were from the same place.
Yeah, and we had somebody else from Allentown. I can't remember the dude's name.
Yeah. And and what ended up coming out of that was different levels of friendship, and then also different levels of friendship longevity.
Correct.
Because I think out of the posse, you and I are the only 2 people that are still deeply connected.
Right. Lost a lot
You
of
know what I mean? We lost a lot of them in the mix, and there's still, Robin Eddie's still out there. He's still in the sauce. Some of the guys or whatever, they went on. Some of them don't even never know what happened to them, frankly.
Correct.
Clearly, Brad had some substance abuse issues like I did. And,
I did too.
and he and I have still, been in contact once or twice over the years as well. So, I got to say the best thing that came out of, aside from the memories, out of Millington Naval Air Station, aside from a relationship that ultimately ended in a child, was my relationship with you.
Word.
So here we are 30 years later, right? And you and I talk sometimes half a dozen times a week or more.
True
you know
that.
what I mean? Other times we'll go a week or 2 and we won't talk, but we pretty much pick up where we left off.
Right.
Dave is in procurement for the Department of Defense, has been now for years. Worked in aviation prior to that. Went to school for business management and some other things. So, so we share a lot of concepts, ideas. We talk about things like leadership.
Yep.
You and I share hosting a podcast called Leadership Gold, which stands for the Global Organization of Leadership Development. And what we do is, we neither of us are leadership experts,
Correct.
but we get an opportunity to talk about certain leadership principles, and we bring in other people, and we get to get feedback and background from other people about situations that they're dealing with. We get to choose a topic, right? That we'll pull excerpts from certain things that we've read or certain situations that we were experiencing at the time, and then we get a great opportunity to open the floor to hear what other people are experiencing. And it's been really, we haven't really had a huge amount of attendance, which has actually been really kind of cool in a way,
Right.
because the meetings have been really intimate, and
Correct.
what we've really peeled back is some really interesting things about other people and and what they're experiencing, which, the neat thing is we get to take those back to the organizations that we run and implement those,
Correct.
Those lessons that we're getting. Sometimes it's not even just lessons. It's just like kind of a refresher.
Absolutely.
So,
happens a lot.
And I said this before, I've said this a couple times since we started doing this, but the really cool thing about this is that the stories lead to a different understanding of individuals that even people that are close didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, we get opportunities to get like little tidbits or clippets or snippets of people's backgrounds. And over time, we compile that into a deeper vision of who an individual is. You know what I mean? Like, and part of that's past history. But what this leads to is getting an opportunity to go at a deeper level, talking about background and history and where somebody came from and how it led them to, where they are now. Right. And because the format's long form and we're really not restricted to how long we can be here, we get an opportunity to go as deep as we want to go about wherever the fuck we want to go.
Right.
So, now you're originally from O'Fallon, Illinois,
yep,
right?
Just outside of St. Louis.
Just outside of St. Louis. And I got an opportunity, while we were still in Millington, to take some long distance drives to go to O'Fallon back to the home front, basically, party in a cornfield like you boys did growing up.
Yeah.
They'd pull a couple cars into a cornfield. Yep. They'd throw the lids of the back of the car up. They'd be bumping some systems. Yep. They'd have some kegs, and we would all be out there with a bonfire, just getting destroyed and laughing and having a good time. Correct. So, the funny thing is that for what it's worth, that was a different experience for me. I had
You're city boy, basically.
Well, no, that's not necessarily true. I mean, I had my stints with partying in the woods, but we really didn't have cornfields like you all had, where you could just like, right. You know what I mean?
City
like,
growing up.
I'm kind of a suburb kid.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? Like, actually, the funny thing is, I don't fit with the country folk, and I'm clearly not a city boy. Right. But the really cool thing about my past history was that when I roll with country folk, they treated me like country folk.
Yep.
Right. You know what I mean? They embraced me, took me in. Yep. They might clown me a little bit about Jimmy from Philly, or, what I mean? Blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And the same thing, even long before I went into service, you know what I mean? I was an Italian kid from the suburbs or whatever. Right. And they found out my last name was DiNardo, and they were like, hey, you know what I mean? Come on, man. You know what I mean? And they took me in and treated me like one of them. Right. And ultimately what ended up happening was I ended up with some city in me. And also, when we hung out, I ended up with, and you weren't the only experience. Frankly, when we were in Memphis, Tennessee, we were in Millington. You know what I mean? That was another level of country that neither of us really were. No, we didn't. Right. And that was and frankly, was that your first experience in the? I mean, that's not. I guess that's considered the South. Is that deep South yet?
I don't know if
it's not deep South like Mississippi deep South, but it's definitely South.
I think you crossed the line when we made it into Tennessee.
Right. So and so we were both getting, things that had to do with, race and ethnic, you know what I mean? Like shit that was like, to me, was completely, at least in part off my radar. Right. So suddenly was like, oh, wait, these are things that people, people consider different things here, that they look at us different here too. And it wasn't just you, although you had obviously the more, right? But for me, it was, it was kind of like, I was a Yankee. Right. You know what I mean? And there was some interface that I had where people heard, my accent or the way I spoke, and immediately were like,
you ain't from here.
You ain't from here. And, and maybe not you're the enemy, but you're definitely an outsider, and you're on the verge of. We're going to decide based on how you act.
Correct.
Right. We're going to combine that with how we assess who you are based on your accent and otherwise. And then we're going to determine whether or not, you know what I mean? They're going to be,
you can stay or not.
You can stay, or whether they're going to be like, get them, you know what I'm saying? So now O'Fallon, Illinois. So you were, okay, so I'm 55 and you're 54. Right. Yeah. So you were, for all intents and purposes, you're class 88.
Correct.
Right. So, and you didn't go into service like I did right out of high school.
No.
Now, we both waited a year or two. We both basically went out and got our asses kicked right?
Yeah, I got my ass kicked on the football field. Yeah. I mean, I went for a football scholarship at Northeast Missouri State University and found out that you got to go to class to stay on the football team.
Ain't that a bitch?
My dad didn't tell me that when I left.
Yeah, because I got high. You know what I mean? So I did the same thing. Like we were both, for all intents and purposes, college dropouts when we met. You know what I mean? And because our lack of preparation and inability to accept personal responsibility led us to a position where suddenly the Navy looked like a good choice for us.
It's the only thing I had.
I wasn't the type of person. Some people were like, I went and saw the judge, and he was like, either the military or jail, and they were like, they chose the military. That wasn't my situation specifically, but clearly had I stayed on the same path that I was on, I probably would have ended up in jail instead of the military.
Well, let me tell you a story, because I don't know if you know this or not, man. So the reality of the whole thing from Northeast Missouri State University was one day, and I was living in it was like a apartment. It was a set of apartments, right? Like 10 apartments connected together in essence. And I had a roommate that I didn't really like, right? And so we had basically cordoned off the room. Right. This half is your half. This half is my half. The bathroom and the kitchen are common. Right. So there's a big sheet. Right. Okay. So one day what happened was the RA or resident advisor came to the door, and he knocked on the door, and I opened the door, and he's like, "Hey, is your roommate here?" And I was like, "I don't think so." And I grabbed the curtain, flipped the curtain open, and dude had left his weed on the Frisbee on the table. Yeah. So when I opened up the curtain, the resident advisor saw that, and he went immediately to the cops. Right. So technically what you're talking about, I actually was in front of the judge almost, and I had to make the decision, am I going to keep playing this game, or am I going to go do something that's going to get me somewhere, or am I going to jail? So I basically left school, joined the Navy. My dad said I didn't have the stones to join the Navy because somebody was going to be screaming at me and hating on me for a couple months in boot camp, and I was like, it's the same thing you do to me all the time, so I don't see why you don't think this is going to work. Right? But when I left, here's the funny part of the story. When I actually left, checked into MEPS, and went to boot camp, the Kirksville, Missouri police visited my house. My dad sent me a letter while I was in boot camp, and he was like, the cops were here looking for you. And I told them you joined the Navy, and they basically went back to Kirksville and, in essence, let you off because you joined the Navy. You took the military route. That's the only thing that kept me from going to jail in Kirksville, Missouri. And I didn't have nothing. I didn't do nothing. Right. But I was associated based on my roommate.
He didn't even share his weed with you, did he?
Man, it was some ditch weed. Dude. Like, I didn't even want that. You know what I'm saying? Like at 17.
Sticks and stones, baby. Sticks and stones. You want to hear something really fucking funny and crazy is how much our stories are similar. So I was in my freshman year at University of Arts at Broad and Pine in Philadelphia.
You showed me that when I was here last time.
Yeah, we drove past it, right? So I lived in a dorm apartment in the back end, right? So, I had two roommates, right? You know what I mean? Like, we shared some interest in art, and we shared plenty of interest in getting on at any chance we could get. You know what I mean? We had bong building competitions. It was not you never lived that crazy. You never lived till you're with a bunch of art students, and it's like, let's see who can build the most creative thing that we could smoke out of for this week, right? So. Of course, I was off to the races like a motherfucker. But the interesting thing was, so here I am at UA, right? I'm in my freshman year, right? You know what I mean? Like, we're pretty shot out crazy. We're partying all the time. You know what I mean? Like, one thing's for sure is art college, there is no athletic program. The athletic program is basically getting on. Right? You know what I mean? Like, that is the only athlete. That is it.
That is sport.
That is sport, right? So it's like next level, at least in that category. You know what I'm saying? So, so there was a terrarium that we had, like a little, like basically a fish tank. And then we had fish, but then the fish died. So then it turned into a terrarium, and we had a little, gravel in it or whatever. And then my buddy bought a couple geckos, and they all died except one, and one was Spleef. And then eventually Spleef died, right? So, but we had weed seeds. So I kept chucking weed seeds up in there. Terrarium. And then the next thing you know, we had a couple sprouts, and the sprouts got bigger. And then eventually, the plants were taller than the terrarium. Right. So one day, the RA and security come busting in. Yep. And they walked down the hallway with the weed plants like this and whatever. And I was just like, oh, shit. And then immediately it was like, they didn't kick me out of school, but they did kick me out of the place to stay. And I couldn't really tell my parents, who had, like at least in part remortgaged their house to get my,
to get you in,
to get my
you going,
in, right? You know what I mean? So I basically ended up like sleeping on my girlfriend's couch and a few other things just for those last few weeks. But in the end, there were a couple expenses that that still existed that I couldn't settle up on, and for that reason, they never released my transcripts. So
Gotcha,
and not like they were stellar.
Yeah, but they had a little something.
You know what I mean?
Right?
Well, the funny thing is that art college would have been great, except that they were the only accredited art university in the country. That was what was different about them. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Like they had passed the accreditation, so you know what I mean? Like it was, so they were the only art university in the country, and it was like it was their first year, you know what I mean? So, but in the interest of that, they also wanted to make sure the academics were strong. So, me being dyslexic, right? You know what I mean? And then smoking all kinds of weed, you know what I mean? It was before the chronic days, but it was enough, and the LSD and the other things didn't help, right? So my ability to be able to focus and maintain getting good grades through the other things that I needed to do there, like Englishes and, it was English and history, you know what I mean? And both of those I struggled through.
Right.
So I didn't have too much problem with the art stuff because that's, my job.
Yeah, I mean, you were in that.
But you weren't going to survive getting a degree there without surviving the rest of it, and clearly I was not. So I could blame it on the weed plants or the, you know what I mean? But the bottom line was,
I was screwing up.
I was,
I mean, bottom line, man.
But I was, selling cars, you know what I mean, when I decided to go in. So, you were in for college for what, 2 years before you went in? Right. See, I made 1 year. So, but we were in pretty much in close.
18 months,
we were in
close.
Close alignment. And the funny thing is, here's a good example of the fact that here you and I have known each other for fucking 30 years, and we have a similar story.
Yep, and we didn't even know that till just now.
Just now.
Right, there's pieces of that I knew small, snippets of that, but until you put the whole story together.
And you too. Right. There you go. How about that?
Right.
So, okay, so you had alluded to the fact that, you and your father didn't get along. So now I know that you have two older sisters.
Yep,
half sisters, right? And
one.
one. We're writing one of them off. Right now, so, I mean, not without good reason.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, am I allowed to say jerk off?
Yeah,
she's a jerk off.
You might.
Right. So, but ultimately, those are other things that came out in conversation very, very recently.
Right.
That I didn't really know about, how you really felt about your pop.
Right.
Because now, and here's the reason why, is because over the years that I've known you, right, especially as we've gotten closer in the latter years, you know what I mean? Like you were having communications with your pop, and, and I didn't really know that, that you had run aground on, how. So let's talk a little bit about young life. So, so mom was second marriage for your dad, right?
Correct.
Right. So. And you came on the scene with at least oldest sister who hated your guts the fact that you were even born.
Well, so let me clarify that, because back in the day, the oldest sister and I were buddies, and me and the middle sister were not.
Right.
And so as time progressed, that whole kind of dynamic shifted. But what you actually what you actually asked me about was my dad, right? So what happened was my parents got into it about the time I was a sophomore, maybe when I was a freshman. It all started.
You say get into it. Say more. They were
battling. Yeah, they were fighting and stuff. I think my dad might have had a extracurricular affair or something going on the side, right, which was causing the conflict between the two of them.
Right.
So basically, man, I mean, cutting to the chase, about my sophomore year at high school, my parents divorced. And that was somewhat the cause for some of my, hatred and discontent towards my dad. Because think about it, sophomore in high school, you got junior and senior year left, and then you're kind of off on your own, right? My mom calls 16 through 18 years old like the finishing school, right? We're going to go ahead and dial you up the rest of the way so you can step out and make this thing work. So in my head, when all this stuff went down in '86 with my parents, it was like, I'm missing out on the finishing school. Everything that I thought I had going on in my head that was going to be advantageous for me all of a sudden was in question.
Right.
And it was all in my head. It was all technically predicated off my dad's decision to go step out on my mom.
Right. Right.
So not being,
Now let me ask you a question, because we've never really talked about this. Based on your personality that your mother has. So you've gotten to know your mother and father now in a different light.
Correct.
I've met your mother. I've never met your dad, but I've met your mom, right? And we're also both divorcees, both remarried, right? So now that you've had time to be able to connect with your mother on a deeper level, you live with your mom for a while.
For a while, she came and moved
in with you.
Right.
And yeah, that's different,
Right.
right? And you've also, reinforced your relationship with your father.
Yep.
Not to say that it's justified to ever go out on a relationship and go behind somebody to somebody else or whatever. But based on your relationship with your mother and your father now, and the way your mother was, or the way you imagine your mother was at the time, do you think at least in part a change for your father was justified based on that disconnect? Or
yeah. So I think there was some stuff that was, clearly missing in their relationship, right? At 15, I couldn't tell you what that was. Right,
yeah, because we're not relationship capable. Yeah.
Right. But as I've gotten older, I've kind of been able to understand his perspective probably a little bit more,
right.
Which might have led to my divorce as well. Right. I mean, so I.
Well, say more about that? Well,
right.
His perspective. You mean in terms of his influence on you in your relationship with?
I think the relationship between my dad and my mom was missing some important components. Right. Which, in his mind, gave him the green light to go.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So whatever was in that relationship that was missing created that opportunity, or so he thought.
Right.
And so now, having gone through a divorce myself, I can kind of see what happened. Right. And I'm going to tell you right now, man, I mean, to be honest with you, Dino, I was probably, like I said, I was 15, 16 when they got divorced. Mm-hmm. And I was really looking at it as how it was going to affect me. Right. Me was the thing. I'm going to get affected. I'm not going to get to do this. That messes up my program. That's what the whole thing was really predicated on. That was my hatred for my dad, is because he messed up my life. What I didn't understand at that point was that's his deal. My game doesn't stop.
And he's trying to preserve his life too.
Exactly. But my game doesn't stop based on his decision. My game can still go. But at 15, 16... don't really know that. You know what I mean?
So it's too much of a change.
Right. I did a bunch of stupid stuff while I was, while him and I were battling. I mean, while I was at school, I'd come home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever, and I'd go stay with my buddies, man, for 3, 4, 5 days and never even see him. Right. And it wasn't until I got to about 26, 27 years old, as I started to mature and grow up, and then I started looking back on the relationship, and I was like, this dude ain't that bad.
Right.
Everything he's ever told you has been true.
Right.
Right.
I'm just not in agreement with the actions he took. And frankly, the actions were, at least in part, in the interest of self-preservation of his own life.
Correct.
And, and honestly, like in my first marriage, my first ex, right? You know what I mean? Like a lot of what her approach to communications with regards to me and is that I should always sacrifice for the benefit of the family.
Yeah.
But the effective word there is I. Right? You know what I mean? And you come to find later on that, that agenda was meant to condition me that I should sacrifice for the benefit, but those sacrifices were never unilateral.
Correct.
Right? And, or I'm not going to say never unilateral. I'm sure she made sacrifices on her own. But the point of the matter that agenda was weighted against me.
Correct.
Ever having, I should not be able to have a fruitful, beneficial, happy, life or any resource of my own or all of that for all intents and purposes. Probably the explanation would have been that self-serving counter agenda would have been that, like you don't deserve to have because, you should be willing to give up your entire life, existence, finances, or whatever because. Right. You know what I mean? Like you have children and you have a responsibility to me. And, and to a point, I believe that there's some merit in that, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you're the individual on the other side and you're riddled with guilt and shame and low self-esteem and low self-worth and there's other type of things, and then somebody comes at you with that, you end up realizing you sacrificed a good portion of your life because somebody else had some sort of a counter agenda. And then later on, you go, wait a minute. You know what I mean? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
100%.
it shouldn't have been at this level, right? You know what I mean? Like I shouldn't, like, yes, you know what I mean? Like my, I'm in recovery. My sponsor says, when you put yourself last, you always get cut to come first.
Correct.
But then he always prefaces that with, I said last, I didn't say not at all.
Correct.
Right? You know what I mean? And what, and the agenda that I had been fed was put yourself not at all.
Yeah.
And what ended up happening was, I went through maybe some level of unnecessary hell. Right? So, all right. So you had said that, your father played sports like you played sports.
Yeah.
Right?
My dad was a 9-letter high school graduate. So
right.
baseball, basketball, football, basically from the time he was a sophomore all the way up through. He was a 3-letter All-American, baseball, basketball, and football. My uncles, baseball, basketball, football. My grandpa was at least baseball that I know of, right, because he was the coach. So, I come from a pretty athletically inclined,
What
family.
did he think about your decision to go in the military? Like,
at first he wasn't really happy about it because, I had some skills on the field. You know what I mean? And he was like, so you're going to go do that. And then again, like I told you a minute ago, he was like, I don't think you got the stones to do that because you're going to have people like, in your face all the time. Basically, my dad thought I was a mama's boy. That was the other piece of it. He was always like...
Was there some truth in that?
So let me put it to you like this. Mama's boy, daddy's girl. Isn't that how it kind of works?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right? So I'm getting static from my dad about technically being normal.
Right.
Of course my mom loves me. Of course she's loving on me because mom loves her son, right?
Right.
I had a psychologist tell me when I was going through my divorce that don't worry about your daughter. I know it seems right now like she doesn't enjoy you, but what's going to happen is your daughter and her mama are going to get in a big old argument at some point, and your daughter's going to come running back to you. So what I need you to do, Dave, is just be calm and hang out.
Right, and that's exactly
what happened.
Me too.
I didn't have to go
Some
get
version
her.
of that,
You know what I mean? I didn't have to go chase her.
Right.
Enough of the relationship disintegrated that she was like, hey, this is what's happening with mom. What do you think? And trying to be cool with my daughter. I didn't want to like throw mom under the bus. You know what I'm saying? So my answers to her was like, what you're seeing is what you're seeing, right? That's your truth.
You're seeing truth.
You're seeing your truth. Right. You need to decide how.
And
you're
maybe
deal
not
with
even
that.
necessarily. So there's an interesting thing is we talk about your truth and my truth, and then there's the truth.
True.
Right. And the interesting thing about it is that when we use you and mine, right, we're basically we're calibrating our position, right, based on a skewed viewpoint that usually is tied to some self-serving agenda.
Correct.
You know what I mean? So when I'm like, yo, that's your truth, or that's her truth, or that's my truth, right? That usually means that it's colored in some way with, the way I view or the way I see things or my agenda or whatever. And then somewhere in the middle of it, there is the truth, right? And the truth isn't necessarily, that's just like, oh shit, right? You know what I mean? Like, because my truth usually has...
it's got a sliver of your perspective in it.
Hell yeah, and it's delivered with my perspective.
Correct.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, or, your truth is delivered with your perspective. Right. You know what I mean? There's a narrative that's tied to it.
Correct.
But when it's the truth, there's really generally no narrative to it. It's just you facing the actual reality of what is.
Right.
And the interesting thing was, for my relationship with my first ex, was that, that we were both telling narratives, right? You know what I mean? Like there was her narrative that, that wasn't threaded with, you got your mic up? She was telling her narrative that was threaded with some truths. That's true.
Right.
And my narrative was threaded with some truths, right? But the reality of it can only be seen from a third party that doesn't have any specific agenda.
So I get what you're saying from that, but what I was trying to get Bree to understand was see it for yourself and make your own decision.
Right.
Right? It's not that I don't want you to come and have counsel with me, but there's things about your mother that I'm not going to talk bad to her about.
Right.
But if you pick it up and see it for yourself, whatever that thing may be, it may be a tardiness, it may be, whatever. But you have to grow up enough to be able to discern that yourself.
Right.
I'm not going to talk trash about your mom, even though we're divorced. That's not my place.
Right.
Right?
Oh, I ran in the same situation with mine. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, I could confirm truths that they had seen.
That's what I'm saying.
And that they came to me and said, this and that and this, and I'd be like, yeah. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't chucking anybody under the bus.
Right.
But I had also gotten past the stage of protecting people from what was.
100%.
Right? You know what I mean? And because ultimately protecting other people from what was hurt me. And nobody was protecting people for what was when it came to me.
Yeah,
if it damaged me in some way at
nobody
all,
cared.
It was like, no, actually, you know what I mean? It was enhanced and it was magnified. And it was like, anything that served an agenda to make me, the evil, right. Evil in some capacity or right. incapable right. or incompetent. And frankly, I don't know so much about evil, but incapable, incompetent, some of those things. I've gone through stages in my life where, I was not hitting the mark and that was clear. So I probably deserved some of that, that level of scrutiny or some of that. I'll take that hit, frankly.
Right.
But that being said, you know what I mean? Like, we do cut some slack to people who are incompetent, incapable when they mean well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And when you're in a situation with other people that mean to destroy you, right, to hurt you, right, that's different.
Oh, absolutely.
That's different. And
absolutely.
Frankly, I know plenty of people that are incapable and incompetent, but I still, I might love them from a distance a little bit more. I don't bring them into the inner circle or
right.
tie my success or
anything
to them, but it doesn't mean that I don't, that I despise them or hate them.
Correct.
I don't prefer them as individuals, but I don't plot ways to destroy them.
100%.
Right? You know what I mean? I have had in my life people that have plotted ways to destroy me. Right? You know what I mean? And, and frankly, I think at least in part because I'm happy-go-lucky Jimmy and I'm cool with just about everybody and people who
who can't do that.
Some people hate that.
Right.
Especially if you can't, especially if that's not you. You know what I mean? Like, and I've found that I've been a target in my life, going back to even my childhood where, they were like, oh, happy-go-lucky Jimmy, get him. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was not good. You know what I mean? Like, so, it made me a target.
Yeah.
So, all right. So, we talked a lot. Or you know what? A lot is the wrong word. We had skimmed over briefly, right? So, because knowing you at a deeper level and what I've got to know over you over the years is that you've kept some of your experiences close to the vest. Man shit, for real.
Yeah.
Right? But what you've alluded to more as time has gone on, especially considering that for me, part of my journey has included becoming more vulnerable with the people that I love most, and that includes you, right. Telling some of my backstory about, what my past history was yeah. and some of the abuse and some of the fears and those things that I had. Led you to kind of peel back some things that I didn't know about you, about your past experience and some things that you experienced with racism and yeah. those type of things. So, let's talk a little bit about that because sure. A lot of, like you and I had a conversation today right. about a potential meeting with some bigwigs or whatever and some underlying concerns about whether or not I was enough to be able to include it in the conversation when in fact, clearly you're enough to be included in the conversation. Right. But I think at least for me, and I think some similarity between that, both of us is that that's tied to some past history where, you know what I mean? Like, we experienced people who, who basically demeaned us and you shared some of that. So
yeah, man.
About what age did you start experiencing that stuff?
Oh, dude, I was still little, man. I mean, I'd probably just gotten old enough to walk to school by myself. You know what I mean? When that first really started happening. Now, I'll go back and tell you that I remember very distinctly a situation where my parents and I had moved into our first, well, for me, it would have been the first house in O'Fallon, right? And my dad was standing outside. I might have been standing on the sidewalk or whatever, and a car full of kids drove by and dropped the N-word. My dad jumped in the car and took off after him. I don't know what happened after that. I mean, he came back. I don't know if he ever caught him or anything like that. But fast forward a few years, and we literally moved a block, right? We moved from Jefferson to Washington. That change made me walk past the house every day on the way home from school, where there was a couple dudes in it that loved to sit out in their backyard and wait for me to walk by and yell shit at me. Right? So it made me adjust my route to go to and from school. And I'm like maybe 7 houses from my house. Right? And I'm looking like, are them dudes sitting there? And now in the house on Jefferson, they would have been across the street from me and 3 houses to the left. Right? And also 2 houses away from my babysitter. Right? So as I got old enough to start making that transition to and from school on my own, and that first time I walked past that house and they yelled a bunch of crap at me. I mean, I cried like a little baby, man, and ran to the house. And my dad was like, who was it? And I showed him. Now, I don't know if he went and did anything or went and said anything, but that didn't stop them.
Right.
Right? So if them cats was outside when I was walking to or from school, I had to adjust my course because I wasn't capable of dealing with that at, you know, maybe 10.
You know, I was just thinking of something, right? What I was thinking is I'm going through a strange phase now, at least for me, where I'm starting to look at those formative years and the doubt, the abuse, the damage, the things that I dealt with, and looking at where I am now. And maybe it's a strong word to use the word thankful.
Keep
right?
going.
But kind of looking a little bit more like, were it not for those experiences, right? Like, let's face it, like low self-esteem and low self-worth will drive you to achieve more than your peers, right? And there's a consequence of that. The consequence is a better life than the life of your peers, right? So in some weird way, the people that doubted or seek to harm me, or, you know what I mean? Like, you know, I was Donardo, DeFardo, Retardo, Delardo, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know,
still make me laugh, dude.
Yeah,
It's just it's so,
but
little kid.
And you just really ultimately want to be accepted.
Right.
You know what I mean? And, and that lack of acceptance from others leads to an internal lack of acceptance. And, and then it really turns into, proving yourself. So you're out like leveling white kids on the football field. You know what I mean? Like just
giving it to them, man. Every chance I could get. Every chance I could get.
And those things. And then frankly, like we get out into the real world, into the business world and otherwise. And then it becomes a matter of, I'll show you.
So it's funny that you bring that up because, I mean, technically that was probably most of my football experience was I'll show you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it probably started way back in that stuff with them dudes across the street talking all that noise to me. But in addition to that, what was happening as I got a little bit older was there was the youth football organizations that had kind of started coming to life, right? So you could go play a little football in town, right, as a little kid, get a little flag football going on and get the beginnings of the tackle stuff under control.
Right.
I coached for a team in a league like that back 10 years ago, but those leagues are predicated on age and weight.
Right.
And so I've always been a heavy kid. I mean, even at my best weight, I was heavy.
Right.
My grandma used to carry me and accuse my mom of feeding me rocks. Right. She's like, this kid is so heavy. What are you feeding him? But cutting back to the chase, what was happening was, as a lot of my buddies were going to football practice, they had to walk past my house to get home. And because I couldn't play, they would come and chirp at me, right? Like, we can't wait till we get you on the field. I was like, I can't wait either, right? You guys think you're getting a hand up on me because you're doing all this stuff as a little kid? Little do you know, my dad was an All-American, right? So there was pieces of that puzzle where I was like, you're telling me you can't wait to get a hold of me? I guarantee you I can't wait to get a hold of you. And so our freshman year of football, it all converged, right? So all them cats that had been playing for a couple years, we were all on the field together. And I was like, here we are, gentlemen. It's on now. Well, I'm captain of the football team as a freshman, so I guess you can understand how that went. All right, you guys, they got nothing for me. You get me in the right mindset, there's nobody out here that can stop me. Now, I'll tell you that a lot of my football stuff through the high school years was predicated off the anger that I had against my dad. So I'll tell you that when I got to college, the game changed. Not just got faster, but anger doesn't overcome anger with technique.
We just talked about that.
We just talked about that. So I was getting my ass handed to me in college football a lot of the times, but I redshirted. So the other piece of the puzzle was I was a redshirt freshman, so I was on the hamburger squad. So from the hamburger squad, I got to play against the first string defense. I'll tell you that from my experience playing football at the college level at Northeast Missouri, I scored a lot of touchdowns on that first string defense. I saw that defensive coordinator snap a lot of clipboards, right? Because he was like, this freshman, right? He's running all over you guys. This is the hamburger squad. We're giving them plays on a 3x5 card. They don't even know what they're doing, and he's scoring on you guys. There was a point in time where I ran a play, it scored touchdown. He was like, run it again, the defensive coordinator. And I was like, Coach, they know that play. I'm going to get killed on this one because they know the play. Run it again. Well, I got killed on that one. You know what I'm saying? But the point was, I was beating the first string D. Right? I was crushing them dudes. But all the other stuff that I was doing on the side kept me from, prevented me from progressing to the level that I needed to. That's how I ended up in the Navy, and that's how we met. Because I just wasn't living right. But most of my athletic career through high school, a little bit of college, and even semi-pro has been technically predicated off just an intensity.
So talk about semi-pro, because what was that all about?
So when I got to Michigan and got to the west side of Michigan, there was a semi-pro football organization that was already in play. It was the Kalamazoo Tornadoes. And it was basically a compilation of old college football players that weren't good enough to, make the next level. And there was a guy I met, his name was Neil. He's the one that actually got me connected with the team. He was offensive guard and a linebacker for the team, and I'm not sure how we even met, but we were doing some workouts and throwing the ball around or whatever, and he was like, man, why don't you come over here and check this out with me? And I was like, bet, let's go see it. So, within a couple weeks, I'm starting linebacker for Kalamazoo Tornadoes.
When was that? That was before you went in?
No, that was after I got
got out.
Right, that would have been so we were Navy. I was Navy 90 to 94. You got out in 96.
Right, 96, October 96.
So I made it to, it was when I made it to, it was Cal Aero before it was Duncan.
Right.
So I graduated from college in 96. So about 97, 98, I started playing football.
Right.
And that was, I was an aviation electronics technician for Cal Aero, which was bought by Duncan. And then while I was doing that, I was playing football on the side. I even took our VPGM to a game. He got to play. So my boy Skip, who was the VPGM for Battle Creek, him and I were tight. He was an athlete. He wrestled. I mean, we had a lot of similarities in our personality and stuff. And one day we were talking. I was like, hey, my buddy Neil, he's out with a knee injury. You want to play tonight? And he was like, absolutely. So we dressed him up as Neil, number 65 for the Kalamazoo Tornadoes, put him on the kickoff team. He had about 3 or 4 tackles that game. You know what I'm saying? He had a blast. So that was some of the connection between me and the, Battle Creek people and Lincoln people, just connecting and making relationships that led me to a bunch of different opportunities, man.
So... All right, so let's go to San Diego.
Oh, that's not a great time, but go ahead.
Well, you know what? Really, in a way, it is, right? Because it led us to now.
So the happenings of San Diego.
So I'll tell a little story, right? So Dave went in on a different program than I did. I had signed up for 6 years, and he had signed up for 4. And when I signed up for 6 years, I signed up for basic training, and then we both went to AT school, but I had signed for 6 years on the dotted line instead of 4. Okay. They gave me an additional stripe, but then they sent me to advanced first-term avionics. They called it AFTA. Okay. And basically what AFTA was that, it was another level of school. So we both went through school. I'm not sure. We weren't in the same classes together. But, we would meet up right after class and go out and party. Right. But you left to go to report to your next duty station.
That was FRAMP school.
FRAMP
so I went to FRAMP school to
which
learn
is
about
in
the
San
helicopter
Diego.
in San Diego, right.
And I stayed for another, it was like 9 months or something like that, 8 or 9 months. I stayed there. And basically they gave me a whole new posse. Yep. Because all my old posse left. Yeah. Right? Because I was the only one in AFTA out of our posse.
Correct.
So you guys all went to San Diego, you and Brad, and you know what I mean? And other guys dispersed all over, but you and Brad went to San Diego. Yeah. So here I was still at Millington. So the relationship I'd had with the girl that I had started dating when you were still there got a little bit more serious. I got a little bit more crazy, et cetera, et cetera. It sounded like that she was pregnant, and then we found out she wasn't pregnant just before I left. But I got my orders, and my orders were... So the funny thing was... So,
tell me
all right,
this story.
So here's an interesting story. So I signed up for the Navy, right? I chose the Navy for a couple different reasons, but one of the reasons I chose the Navy was because, for a lot of us, because we were in the post-Top Gun era.
Correct.
And so we were all, sporting
all
wood over them jets.
Man, yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So we all kind of wanted to be around that shit. So I come to find out that our selection of orders was based on class positioning. Correct. You know what I mean? So I went through AFTA. So for me, the only thing I really wanted to do was work on F-14s. That was it. You know what I mean? I didn't really have any aspirations besides F-14s.
No, you were in Tomcats all day.
I was in Tomcats all day. So, and I think we all
wanted Tomcats
all day, right? But there are only so many Tomcat squads. So we finished school, and I was ranked 3 out of 30 or something.
I think I was 2 out of 17 or something.
Yes, it was like 3 out of 30. So and I'm not sure whether they did the same thing for you guys, but for us, they went in on a white marker board, and they wrote, you know what I mean?
Yeah, all the orders.
All the orders. And
yep. Same. It
was like,
Ships Company,
VF-213, Black
Enterprise,
Lions, right. Miramar,
yep.
right?
Yep.
That shit was like, got crossed out first one. Correct. You know what I mean? Because I wasn't the only cat that was. Second one was, I forget what squadron it was, Yokosuka, Japan, F-14s. That one got marked out too, and I was like, fuck. You know what I mean? Because I was like, that was the only thing I had no plan beyond that. And I didn't know there were only going to be 2 F-14 squadrons on the John. So I was really like, all right, who's number 3? And that was me. And now I had the decision for what I was going to do for the next 4 years of my life, with no plan at all, and all these fucking squadrons, and I'm just like, so I was like, so now, what aircraft it was didn't matter anymore. Yeah. So then it was the only rationale I had, and man, I didn't have more than like a minute or two to choose too, man. You want to talk about fucking hardcore. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, you went to Great Mistakes.
Correct.
Right, you went to basic in Chicago.
Right.
I went to basic in San Diego.
Yeah, the Racket Tennis Club.
Yeah, that's right. So I already knew that I fucking like San Diego. So when they were like, put the line through the next one, I looked up and I was like, and it was HS6, San Diego, California, and I was like,
HS6. Take that.
I'll take that. And then I'm like, okay. Now, the only thing I knew I was going back to San Diego, but I also know that you and Dave were in San Diego. So I'll tell this story.
Not some of my prouder moments.
Yeah, well, that's okay. No, that's okay. That's okay. Well, no. Wait. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of it wasn't really visible as much as it came out later.
Correct.
Right? So And it's funny how I get to tell your story for you.
Well, that's because you were directly involved in it.
I was directly involved in it. So I fly to San Diego. Dave's like, yo, I'm going to pick you up there. I'm like, bet. Cool. So now I got my sea bag with me. I ain't got a pot to piss in or a window to fucking throw it out of, but I got my sea bag with all my shit, a couple other things. I got my Pop-Ups fucking gaffing bat in the fucking top of the
Forgot
bag,
about
right?
that,
You know
man.
what I mean? Like my Skull Smasher, because you never know.
In case something goes down.
I had no
Pop
plan
up.
for any use of the Skull Smasher. I didn't know I might need the Skull Smasher, but kind of almost worked out that way. So Dave picks me up at the airport and shit, and next thing you know, we in the hood like a motherfucker, bro.
Dude.
Like for real, for real.
For reals, for reals.
And Dave goes, hang on a minute, I'll be right back. Cloop, the door closes. And I'm sitting in the back seat. I don't even know why I was I wasn't even in the passenger seat. I think I was in the back seat.
I'm not sure why you did that either.
Yeah, you might have been somebody else riding one. It might have been you and somebody else. It might have been two people. You might have been with somebody else. It wasn't Brad, but
No,
you know what I mean? But you guys, boom, the door closed. And click, click, the door's all locked. And I'm like,
sitting here by myself.
straight out of Memphis. You know what I'm saying?
Not straight out of Compton.
Yeah, right. Straight out of Memphis. You know what I mean? Like white boy from fucking Conshohocken. Right? You know what I mean? In the hood, in a place I ain't never been at before. So I'm like, go in my fucking sea bag and shit, dig around and come out with my gaffing bat, put that shit by my legs and shit just in case I need it. That motherfucker left me in the car for a good hour and 15 minutes. He came back, cooped to the roof. His eyes were like this big, dude. They were getting on.
Yeah, man.
He came back and got me and was like, come on, man. I'm going to go to my girl's house and shit. I was like, yo, dude, why'd you leave me in this John, dude? Like, that was
Hold
cool.
up, man. Let me tell you how you were sitting in the car when I came out, because I remember this like it was yesterday. You was like in the back seat, way down.
Yeah, I would try to draw no attention to myself. I was going to get fucking shot. You know what I mean? They'd be like, I have a past
Did
history.
the cat leave and
Yo, I have a past history of get him. You know what I mean? Like the last thing in the world I was going to do is be visible. Of course I was laying back. I was on straight recline.
You
man.
was almost under the seat.
Yeah, hell yeah, dude. I did not, you know what I mean? I did not know what was up. I didn't know that was what was going down.
Yeah.
So we went to, I'll never forget. So we went to Michelle's house.
Yep.
Right? And my dumb ass always be trying to get down with some depth charges or some shit. And then the next thing you know, we drank we put a big damage on a fifth of tequila.
Yeah.
Big damage on a fifth of tequila.
For sure.
And you were destroyed. She was hurt. And I was driving a porcelain bus because I always say, you know what? Like if you were going hard and she was going hard,
Everybody's going hard.
I was going extra hard. I was trying to, you know what I mean?
I mean, like you did in Carbondale that one
yeah,
time. You
yeah,
came
yeah,
back with that
yeah.
gallon
We'll
of Jack Daniels.
probably tell that story too. We'll probably tell the Carbondale story for real.
A couple of
Right. So the funny thing was, aside from you disappearing from the car, that was the only thing I really knew about. It wasn't until far later that we had a conversation that it was like, here's what I went to do during the time that I
when you were
left
sitting
you in the car, right? So you lucked out.
Technically true.
Right? Because you didn't pop.
Right.
You were completely off the radar.
Yep.
And you moved out of the apartment with Brad.
Yep.
You
That
didn't
probably
tell me.
saved my life.
You didn't tell me not to move in, though. I got beef.
To be honest, I thought dude was going to sea.
Yeah,
because he was supposed to.
Oh, he
check out
did.
going
Left
to
me
sea.
with all the bills.
Well,
so
so
that's
I didn't know
what's
that's
up.
how that was going down.
He
you know
was
what I'm
pretty
saying?
quiet about it too, frankly. I didn't find out he was smoking until he was locked in his bathroom for fucking 6 hours a night, and and he'd pop out every couple of minutes and be like, every couple hours, I'd be like, yo, ain't no motherfucker on the planet ever needed to use the bathroom that long.
Right.
You know what I mean?
He's in there with the pickle jar.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, yeah, he was for real. You know what I mean?
I'm familiar with that.
Smoking them rocks.
Yeah.
So, so you went to Jacksonville.
Yes. My permanent duty station had always been Jacksonville.
You were HSL. You were Lamp Squadron. Lamps
Correct.
what? 84?
Light airborne multi-purpose. I was 42.
42.
Right. Because in San Diego, the training squadron was 41.
Right.
And then on the East Coast, the training squadron was 40. So it was 40 and 41 were the two training squadrons on the opposite coasts.
Right.
And then it was all the rest of the numbers going up from there.
So let's talk a little bit about to the audience so we both went to helicopters, but we went to different types of squadrons. So I went to HS6, which was carrier deployed, right? And there was no designation letter behind HS. It's a HS helicopter squadron, which actually was Hell Anti-Submarine. It's Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron 6, right?
Right.
So we were carrier deployed. We had 8 helicopters, right? And when we carrier deployed, we took basically 7 of those helicopters and we got on the aircraft carrier and we deployed.
Right.
You were in a LAMP squadron,
Yep.
right? So you deployed on a fast frigate.
Fast frigate, destroyers. I mean, we had all the small boy stuff.
Right. So when you deployed, you took 2 helicopters, right?
Correct.
Right. So, and your detachment, like we left with 140, 150 people. You went with what, 25, 30?
Yeah, it was basically 2 or 3 from every rate. So 2 sheet metal, 2 hydraulics, 2 ATs, 2 AEs, maybe 3 AEs, right? But I mean, we were small compared to you. I mean, we were, take 10 dudes out of the squadron and make a detachment that's going to go with these 2 helicopters and go out to sea on this frigate.
Right. So here was the
took
difference.
Your whole squadron.
Here was the other difference between us is that I went to San Diego, but after FRAMP school, which is Aircraft Familiarization School, where they teach you about the electronics on the aircraft.
That's why I was in San Diego.
That was why you were in San Diego.
FRAMP school.
My squadron was right next to that squadron.
Correct.
So, and that squadron was land-based when they were on land in San Diego.
Yep.
You flew to the other side.
Yep.
So you were on East Coast. Well, the difference is, for the most part, West Coast squadrons are Pacific Fleet.
Correct.
So we're PAC Fleet. So we go across the Pacific, and then we do, typically that would be like PI, Japan, right. Hong Kong, Singapore, and then United Arab Emirates 50,000 times when we were in, right? You were Atlantic Fleet.
Correct.
So you sailed the other way, right. And you spent a lot of time in the Mediterranean.
Correct. So,
what were your port of calls like? What port of calls did you hit?
Oh, man, we were Egypt, Italy, Saudi Arabia. I mean, our home port away from sea was Hurghada, Egypt. I mean, we pulled into there 40 times. That was actually the first place we pulled into when we went out on our long cruise. So we were like 37 days at sea to pull into Egypt. And that was also the first time I ever saw a Russian submarine.
Right.
There's 2 subs pulling out when we were pulling in, and I was like, "What's that?" Right, and they were like, "That's technically what we're hunting."
Right.
You know what I mean? It's Cold War time, so we're not hunting per se, but we're certainly keeping an eye on that. Right. So I mean, everything I did was off the East Coast. I mean, we did the ditch, we did the Suez Canal, right? We did all kinds of weirdo stuff off the East Coast, but it was all East Coast.
Are you a shellback?
No,
okay.
Did not do that.
So what a shellback is somebody who's going through the ceremony of crossing the equator.
Correct.
It's a many, many 100 years old tradition and dates back to prior to military service. It actually goes back to, I believe, the British or, that type of thing. And they do a ceremony where when you cross the equator, there's a process that you go through. And before you've crossed the equator, they call it a slimy wog.
Yeah, polywog.
Yeah, polywog. And then after you've crossed the equator, you become a trusty shellback. Yep. Right, so I crossed the equator twice. So, and they would actually steam the ship so that they could cross the equator, so that they could do it. Yep. Right, you know what I mean. So, but where you were located, you figure in Florida, you would have had to go south, right? And there was no reason to go that far south to cross the equator when you were steaming. For all intents and purposes, steaming east at that level. Correct. Like, there was a big difference for us because we were already far enough across this, Yeah,
you're south.
We're already south, and we were going to go to many places that were actually more close to the equator where we were going to. So
yeah, I mean, basically, you were Southern California, I was Northern Florida.
Yes, exactly,
what I mean?
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about what was your favorite port of call?
So, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know that any of them really great. I had a good time, but none of those places are places that I'd, want to go back to, right? Italy was cool.
Now, where'd you port in Italy?
Oh man, there was like 3 or 4 different places in Italy that we ported. I can't even remember all of them, but there was one of them that probably would have been the best fun. But both helicopters were broke when we got there, so the dance was
turning wrenches.
No liberty until the choppers are up, right? So I mean that kind of screwed that one up. But I mean, listen, man, we got off the boat in a bunch of places, went and had beers, had a good time. You know as well as I do. You go into port and there's a brief. Don't go over here.
Right.
Don't go over there.
Don't go all the fun places.
Don't go all the fun places,
Yeah,
right? And then as the night progressed, everybody started to kind of accumulate around the places we weren't supposed to be.
Not to go to.
Right? It's like, don't tell us where not to be, because that's exactly where we're going to end up.
Right.
I'm not sure where the lads are.
Where was that again?
Right,
let me make sure I avoid the
right.
that
Be
place.
right there.
Yeah,
right? And everybody's looking at each other like, I'm going to meet you over there.
Okay. So where was the place that you disliked the most when you ported?
I didn't like Hurghada. I didn't like Egypt, man. There wasn't a whole lot going on there. As a matter of fact, that was the place where we actually called home and had the squadron ship us like 3 pallets of beer. Right? We had Bud Light, Coors Light, Budweiser show up on the helicopter, right? There was a beautiful sight. Helicopter flying in. You've seen this before, right? They're 5-6 miles out, and somebody spots them. And then it's like, hey, man, there's something hanging off the bottom of that, right?
Beer.
Right? This thing's flopping around like that, you know what I mean? And they come in and set it down and open up the nuts, and it's like, American beer,
Yeah, right?
So we had a big party on the pier in Hurghada because you couldn't drink the beer there. It wasn't alcohol-based. It was formaldehyde-based.
So, we drank the shit out of that.
Well, and then they taught us after the first couple times, like, take some aspirin with you and, pop a couple of aspirins every few beers.
Yeah, nobody told us that. It was just like that the hurt you had.
Yeah, so my boys, small boy, we're a little bit closer. You're 5,000 dudes deep. We're probably 500 dudes deep, right? So in that smaller unit, right, when you come back and you're hurt the next day and everybody's
But you never had a beer day on ship.
Steel Beach? Yeah, we did.
Oh, you guys Steel Beach?
Yeah, we Steel Beach once or twice.
Right.
Get your 2 beers.
Right.
I mean, that was all good. Don't get me
What
wrong.
was the longest you were ever on ship without porting?
That was when we left and made it to Egypt. That was like 38 days.
Right. Right.
But we also got lucky, and we were like I can't think of the name of it, but we ended up being the flagship for a minute.
Okay.
Right. So the highest ranking person in the 6th Fleet or whatever, he rode with us for a couple of weeks. So there's places we pulled in that we would have never pulled in had that not happened.
Right. Because he won
Because he
big
wanted
ball.
to go right. He wanted a big baller. Like, well, yeah, sure, take a left, man. Drop us in port. Word.
Nice.
Right. My second, probably most hated place would have been Gitmo.
Oh, that's right. You guys ported in Gitmo.
Well, we didn't port in Gitmo. We broke down in Gitmo. Right. We spun a bearing on one of the drive shafts for the props on the boat, so we had to sit in Gitmo for a while. And what happened was we ordered a part, and it showed up, 7-8 days later. The right box showed up.
The wrong part
in the box was wrong, so we had to sit a little bit longer and wait. And so anybody that's ever been in Gitmo, there ain't nothing happening in Gitmo. There's a bowling alley, a movie theater, and maybe a bar.
Right.
That's it.
And a bunch of crayon eaters.
Right.
That's it.
And then that hot line that you can't cross because now you're in Cuba.
Right.
Right. So it was a long, I don't know, we were probably there 10, 14 days. You know what I mean? But there was just nothing to do.
Right. Right. Play a lot of bones. Play a lot of spades.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, it got to the point where everybody's sitting outside the bar, right, just looking at each other like, when's this part showing up, bro? Like, I don't know, man. I'm not a dispersing clerk. I couldn't tell you, but I need it too. We got to get the hell up out of here.
What did you learn most about those ports? Like, did you learn anything? Like, what did you see differently from deployments?
I mean, honestly, it was the way we live is actually Americans, man. Right? Like, we actually have a lot. Right? In some of these other countries, they don't have nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You pull into some of these places and they're like, you give me $1, right? I do something for you, right? I mean, shine your shoes or something like that. It's just the poverty in some of these places. It's just so ridiculous. And then I go home and I'm like, salty because the hot water's not hot enough or whatever. And it's like, man, there's so many people in this world that don't have anything close to what you got. And you're so, like, salty about it. Why? You know what I mean?
I remember a couple different things, and strangely enough, like those, some of the calibration was at least in part somewhat in the reverse, because some of it was on the, on the North American continent. I remember Mikey and I, he had a little truck that I used to clown him because he got stuck one time because it looked like it was 4-wheel drive, and it was usually like 2, maybe even
one.
Right?
Single track.
And we went down to Mexico, and we went to this grocery like, when I say grocery store, it's like a little, bodega, and I mean, it was tiny. And I remember, like, it was all like the porch, everything was like all this old weathered wood. And we went up inside because we wanted to get something cold, and we bought 2 Coca-Colas out of there. And on the shelves there was like 1 box of cereal, 1 can of soup, you could have spent $20 and walked out of there with everything they had. Right? So we're standing on the front steps drinking these ice cold Coca-Colas, and there's a tree about 30, 40 feet away across the dirt road, and there's a truck cap sitting underneath the tree, and I'm drinking my Coke, and we're laughing, coking and joking, and I looked over and I saw some movement, and then I noticed, like, we were trying to focus on it, there was like bead curtains hanging from the truck cap was sitting directly in the dirt. And I saw a woman and her kid come up from underneath that truck cap, holding hands, like, come up out, and I was like, there's 2 people living
in that truck cap.
In the dirt. It wasn't even the truck. It was just the cap sitting in dirt.
Just the cap, right.
And I was like, oh, shit. And then Mikey would be like, it was unkind. So I'll say that. But when you're young, you don't really realize how.
All right, you say some dumb shit.
Yeah. So we would come across the border, and you'd just get attacked by 50 kids that be trying to sell you some chiclets. Chick-lay. So Mikey one time was like, hang on a second. He got out and he went to, like, just as we were pulling up to the border crossing, he got out and went over to this like little bodega thing and bought a brick of Chick-lay. And then when all the kids come running up to the window, you roll out the window, you try to sell them Chick-fil-A. And I was like, yo, dude. You know what I mean? Like, it was funny at the time. Right. But later on, you realize that these kids are really freaking trying to get $1.
Yeah, $1.
Man. Right? You know what I mean? And you go, it's funny how with age and wisdom and, like, so, and what I meant by that being like a calibrating difference is, like, when I was in Hong Kong, right, they had now we're talking about first time I was there was 1993. They had the highest level of cell phones per capita anywhere in the world. Now, to us, cell phones I remember I bought a cell phone from one of my boys when I say cell phone, I bought a purse phone from him. And I went to the bar and pretended like it worked because it wasn't connected yet.
Did that, man.
Yeah, and I was like this, sitting at the bar on the phone. Yep. The phone ain't even activated, but I'm like, yo, them girls is checking me out.
Yep.
Right? So, but we got to Hong Kong, and people were like walking around on the phone, and they had like dirty flip-flops and didn't have no money. And I was like,
but you got a phone.
How is this even,
possible?
Possible. You know what I mean? Like, that people slept where they worked. Like that I would, in Wan Chai, in the little, place I was staying in, which was basically the Love Motel, as we call it, the Love Motel in Wan Chai.
You West Coast sailors.
Yes, because you could rent it for an hour if you wanted to, and it had mirrored ceilings and all, the nicest velour around. You know what I mean? And you know what I'm saying? But and the bowl of condoms on the counter when you checked in. You know what I mean? Don't try none of them condoms because they was way too small. To all my Asian brothers and sisters, I'm very sorry. Them condoms was not fitting nobody. You know what I'm saying? They'll give you some Kermit the Frog junk. You know what I mean? Was what you were getting out of those. You know what I'm saying? That shit was gonna bust for real. So, but I remember like checking in for the first time, and and I'm like, ain't nobody here. And it's like 3:00 in the afternoon. And then boink, somebody popped up from behind the counter, and I look over the counter like this because I'm 9 foot tall in China.
Compared to them, right?
And there's a cot behind the counter, and they be sleeping there. And I was like, oh, wait. You know what I mean? Like, this is live and work to the next level. You know 100%. What I mean? Like, they will be there to check you into your room, but they will also be sleeping behind the counter while you're in your room. So, yeah, so many, like, you're 100% correct. Like, just the calibration to how wealthy a nation we really are.
Right.
And how people with less are really happy. That's the part that maybe kind of struck me as off, right? Because I always thought more make you happy.
Thought that too.
You know what I mean? And, and just, that we ain't got the patent on happiness. We ain't got the patent on smiles. We ain't got the patent on kindness, right?
So how does that happen, though? You know what I'm saying? So you have people that are clearly financially destitute, right? I mean, they really don't have nothing.
Right.
But there seems to be almost a level of happiness or joy in that. You know what I mean? They're different people, and they're broke, but they're still not like us.
So there's a level of there's a level of narrative, right, that's driven the American experiment, right? And that narrative has basically been spun by corporations that pitch conspicuous consumption is the way to happiness. So, your generation, my generation, going back several generations to, probably, the greatest generation, right? Each generation has been sold that the way to prosperity is to have more. And we've gotten so far away from the greatest generation who had experienced the Great Depression. So for them, they'd experienced having nothing. In fact, starving in many cases. So, but sooner or later, the tail wags the dog, and we get so far away from that narrative, the narrative becomes the norm. And then it's hard to remember, right? You know what I mean? Like, you live in that narrative for so long, then it becomes that's the way you're happy.
Right.
And, and you experience others with far less who are, easily as happy. Now, no, there's an old saying that says it's impossible to frown on a fucking jet ski. And I believe, right? You know what I mean? And I believe, like, there's some truth to that. You know what I mean? Like, money is a tool, and that tool can make life far easier. But I've met people who are miserable that have lots of money.
Correct.
And I've met people who are destitute that were somehow happy.
Extremely happy.
So, so clearly money is not the solution to happiness. It's just a tool. But I do think that, that it would serve people well to experience what the rest of the world is like, just so they can realize how blessed they really are. Because I think the biggest detriment to, what we experience here in the United States, with all this wealth and prosperity and freedom, because there are people that would say you're not free or whatever. They don't know what lack of freedom really is. They haven't been anywhere else in the world to really see what that really looks like. But, you really realize that we are, that it can be so easy to take it for granted.
Yeah.
And when you take it for granted, we tend to separate each other, and, and we look at our brethren as enemies, and
or at least look down on them.
Right.
Less than.
Right. And the sad thing about it is it takes tragedy to unify, right? Never seen so many patriotic Americans after they hit the Twin Towers. It was different.
Correct.
Didn't matter, you know what I mean?
Right.
Unless you had too much of the wrong kind of tan, in which case you were catching a side eye. And I think for all of us, black, white, Chinese didn't really matter. You know what I mean? Like, if one subgroup or, commits an atrocity that's at that level, right? You know, it automatically creates a level of scrutiny from everybody else.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, suddenly, didn't matter whether you were black or white or Filipino or Chinese, or didn't matter, you know, Mexican. But if you were Middle Eastern,
right.
You know what I mean? You were catching a bit of a different eye.
Especially if you stepped on an aircraft.
I remember Mikey was, they hit the Twin Towers. Mikey was flying with American Flyers in North Jersey. He was giving flight lessons. And I remember, like, they shut him down. I remember he was, like, literally, like, telling me, like, dude, because his flight school was on the other side. Like, he could see the Twin Towers smoking from where he was. That still, when they were still standing. Right. And we were, you know, before the phones really, before the phones shut down, because you couldn't, because everybody on the planet was talking all at the same time.
Right.
And I remember him telling me that, you know, that if you had too much of a tan, you couldn't give flight lessons no more.
Right.
And a lot of me would like to say, well, that's racist. And it, for all intents and purposes, has some ground in racism, right? But on the other side, you know what I mean? Like, that same argument could have been made for internment camps in World War II for the Japanese who lived here. You know what I mean? Right. Like, in that beginning stage, when that level of threat exists, frankly, you know what I mean?
You don't trust nobody.
No, you know what I mean? Like, especially if you look potentially like the individual that caused the atrocity. And there's a big difference between atrocities one-on-one and atrocities on thousands.
Right.
And when that kind of thing happens and the media and everybody else gets a hold of it, the level of scrutiny that's applied to that. So what you really say is, if you are part of, you almost want to rein in your own, right? You know what I mean? To be like, yo, listen, if you do that dumb shit and you hurt that many people, you will cause pain on many of us who look like you.
Right.
Oh, dude, I remember we were going to, he was small, and Cassie was a baby, still in a
stroller or car seat
type thing. So we were flying to Puerto Vallarta, and we got on the plane, and his mom got on the plane. I got on the plane. He was little, and then the car seat, and we got on the plane and sat down, and a football team of Middle Eastern guys got on. I mean, there might have been 20 guys that went by. And
what were you thinking?
I was thinking this is about to go down.
Right.
Dude, we were 2 months out.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, the fact that we were even on a plane. Right. You know what I mean? Like, this was, you know, we were going to all, and grandmother and like, we were all going down, big balling, right? But I remember looking at a guy who was sitting across from me, and he looked back at me, and I was like we had like this look like, yeah, we got each other.
Right.
Like, if it's going to go down.
Right. Me and you, homie.
Well, it's going to go down.
Right.
But was that really, they might have been a football team, right? Like, they, you know what I mean? Like, did they deserve that level of scrutiny? Probably not. But they were getting it anyway.
Right.
Because if it come down to me protecting my family.
Right.
Right. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and I'm on ultra high alert. You know what I mean? Like, you talk about exasperate some post-traumatic stress disorder. You know what I mean? Like, you know, and plus my father and my mother was captain of the ambulance squad. My dad was a fire chief. Right. You know what I mean? Like, my brother was a police officer. You know what I mean? Like, so, you know, them towers hit. They dropped a lot of people that looked a lot like a lot of people that I loved.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? So it hit me all kinds of ways.
Right.
And the strange thing was I was there September 10th.
Didn't know if I knew that or not.
So, all right. He's Dean's what? At 2000, September 11th, he was 2, right? So he was 2, so he was a baby. Sister wasn't even born yet. My ex was working for a pharmaceutical company. We were oil and water. We weren't really getting along that well. God rest his soul, Joe Brown, who I love terribly, called me and was like, yeah, it was actually on the 9th. He called me and said, dude, we're going to New York. You coming? And I was like, yeah. So I said to the ex, I was like, listen, you know what I mean? I got some work-related stuff I need to do. So she was cool with it. I mean, no issue. It probably wasn't as work-related as I had indicated, but I just needed to get some space. So next thing you know, we're in Manhattan. So it's my birthday. I'm with one of my closest friends. We're in Manhattan. We go to this place in Little Italy. So Little Italy is very, very close to the Twin Towers. Like so close, in fact, that you're right up on them. So cat by the name of Jimmy Drew, I haven't seen Jimmy in years and years, but Jimmy was having a party. He had an apartment on the 9th floor of this building in the Little Italy. And Jimmy spun the wheels of steel, you know what I mean? Like he had some music skills or whatever, and there was some fine looking young things in there, and they were smoking bones. And so Joe was like, yo, we need to go get something. We can't go here empty handed. It's a party. I said, well, what do you want to do? So we spent like $120 on Kentucky Fried Chicken. And we're up 9 flights of stairs. Neither of us in great shape, but Joe was probably 50 pounds heavier than me. And we have 9 flights of stairs with buckets and buckets of Kentucky Fried. So we got up there and we busted out all Kentucky Fried. And the next thing you know, we're standing on this deck. And I could see Jimmy Drew from his bedroom with the wheels of steel. He's just jamming, right? And I'm looking, and we're all smoking bones. And the towers are right in front of us. That's the night of September 9th, 2001. September 10th, 2001, I wake up in an apartment where Joe's younger brother, Frankie, is staying. And in those days, you could call in a weed order, right? They sold these things, they called them cubes.
Okay.
And you could call the cubes cat. And the cube cat would show up with basically a backpack. And he would unzip the backpack, and he had all these clear plastic cubes, and they had chronic, different kinds of chronic in them. And it was fucking expensive as shit, but it was a weed delivery service, for Christ's sake. So, so I remember sitting there waiting for the cube guy to show up, and there was a branch in the living room that was over the sofa like this. Mm-hmm. And the guy had a chameleon, and it was one of them ones with the tail that goes like this.
Yeah.
And his name was Shawshank. And Shawshank was like the creepiest looking fucking thing you ever seen in your life. But if you were fucking smoked up, he was cool as shit. So we were all sitting there staring at Shawshank. And in the afternoon, it was evening, Joe said, come on, we got to get out of here. We got to go home. I was like, yeah, that's right, because Max all day, at the time she's my oldie, she's going to be salty. Right. So we get in the car, and Joe had driven. So we're coming south, and we get to, I had parked my car at his house. So we had to go to Philly to drop me off so then I could go home. Right. And we came down Philly, and we were passing by the skyline. And Joe looked at me and said, you see that? Yeah, skyline, we ain't got shit on New York. You know what I mean? Like, we got a cool skyline or whatever, but we ain't got no Twin Towers. And he dropped me off. I got in my car. I drove to my house at the time, Lansdale. The next morning, I'm watching my ex took the kids took him to the daycare and went to work, and I was there in my closet, right, coming out. I'm a big suit in it because I'm running the First Patriot like when we got off the ground, and I come out and I'm literally like, my ex, she called me. She said, "There's a fire on top of the World Trade Center." I said, "What?" Well, I had been with her and her family like the year before. We went up and stayed in Battery Park, and we went to the top of the World Trade Center. So my first imagination was like, that's the worst place to be, where there's a fucking fire, because that shit was scary fucking high. So I turned on the TV. I had a little TV in the sitting room next to my walk-in closet in the master. And I turned on the TV, and I said, and they're talking about the fire and shit, and I'm like this. And I'm tying my tie. And she just hung up the phone, and I was like, boom. And the second plane hit, and I said, we're going to war. And I called her about, she said, ring, 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 ring. She picked up the phone. She was like, I said, go get the kid right now. Go pick up the kid and come home. And, yeah. If I would have stayed that extra day, I would have been in Manhattan.
Right. And who knows what happens then?
Yeah. So, but I got to see them the night of the 9th on my birthday, just before they dropped.
Just before they dropped, right. I was sitting in my office at Battle Creek with one of my customers. And he had walked out to go, grab a drink or, hit the head or whatever. And he come flying back in my office. He's like, dude, you got to come check this out. Like, I can't tell if this is real or fake. Right? So I was like, all right, let's go see what's up. And we both stood there and watched that second plane hit, dude. And I was like, I don't even know what to think.
It's a good thing they couldn't take me because I would have signed up again.
I think a bunch of us thought that because I thought that too. I was like, if it's going down, let's go.
Yeah.
Right? I can pick that AT stuff up real quick. It ain't like it's that far gone.
I even called Willow Grove Naval Air Station to find out what was up and a couple other things. I was like, there was part of me that was like, I'm past inactive reserve because I was in active reserve in 98.
Right.
So 3 years had already passed.
Right.
And, could I sign up? And then the other thing was like, yeah, but I had a little one at home.
Right.
And you know what I mean? So that didn't really ultimately make sense. But, So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about, so you get married, right? You're working as an AT, right? Basically, after being in the service as an AT, so you're working in avionics and electronics.
Been like 96.
Right, 96, right? You go to, work with jets, basically, right? So you did that for how long?
I was in Battle Creek from 98 to 2005.
Right.
No, it might have been 96 to 2005 because I got out in 94, I graduated in 96, so I went to work there in 96. I left Duncan at that point in 2005 and went to Standard Aero in Springfield, Illinois for 2 years. And then I got out of
6,
aviation.
7.
Right.
And then Black Ski Mask Posse, 8. So Black Ski Mask Posse is, Dave, you and I used to call each other basically like, if it don't get no better, we're going to have to pass out the black ski masks.
Well, that was technically predicated on the housing market crash of 2008.
Yes.
Right? We couldn't find nothing. Nothing was working out. We were both like, I was working for the Census Bureau at that point.
I remember. I forgot about the Census Bureau.
Yeah, I did a stint with the Census Bureau for about 6 months. Right? And
we were talking about who was going to get jacked. We were going to heat somebody up. You know what I mean? Like it was about to get ugly.
It was about to get ugly. Man. We had some pretty horrific plans going on about what we were thinking about doing that was not smart at all.
I had, for all intents and purposes, crashed $1 million business. You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of stuff that went along with that, including addiction and PTSD and all those other things. And but there was that point from maybe 2009, we were starting to really have like conversations where I was thinking to myself, like, we're threshold of desperate.
Well, I mean, the Census Bureau, where I was making like maybe $400.
Yeah.
And then I was getting unemployment, which would maybe another $400.
My aunt and my mom chipped in and paid for bartending school for me. And I went to bartending school in Roxborough, PA, which is a little suburb outside of Philly on the Schuylkill River. And because they technically weren't bar and didn't have a liquor license, they weren't allowed to shake actual drinks. So you had like these drinks, you had to demonstrate that you could mix drinks, but you had to demonstrate you could mix these drinks with like a plastic cup with plastic ice cubes in it, and then plastic like accoutrements that went along with it, and then different colored alcohols. Mm-hmm. And those alcohols were actually not even really alcohol; they were just colored water. And so I'm in there like you would have to, right? You know what I mean? And then probably the worst gig I think I ever had, which was I was like, okay, I got my bartending thing. Okay, I got to get a bartending gig, right? You know what I mean? And I was fucking so broke, dude. I was fucking broke. So I'm a Mason. So my father had bought me a tux. So I knew I had one. So I started calling around to see if I could get a job somewhere tending bar.
Right.
And there was this place, there don't exist anymore. They were called Day by Day Catering.
Okay.
And Day by Day Catering was they did events. So I was an event bartender. So we were in the middle of the housing crisis, right? And so you would go and, you know what I mean? Like they would tell you like it was a wedding or a bar, this or that or whatever. Right. And you go and you'd have to like lug all that. They pull up with a van and you'd have to unload like box after box and crate after crate of everything you needed.
You're setting up your bar.
Set up the entire bar.
You have to make your bar.
Ice, everything, you know what I mean? Get it all set up. The beer's all out. You do it all really nice. Get in my tux, stand behind the thing. Make $8. Make $13. I had like an $8 night. One night was like $13. One night was like $15. I was like,
this ain't working.
I was like, dude, not only was I broke, but I was insulted. I was like, how could I, you know what I mean? Like, how could you come up and get it? You know what I mean? How could I serve this many people and come out with like $13? Just didn't, you know what? And maybe it was in a way that it was a calibration in humiliation, humility, right? I had been on the other side. I had been you getting texting?
It's the real estate office. We ain't worried about that.
It's your sister calling about some more cards she just got.
No. We don't read those.
All right, so through the magic of editing, we suddenly both have coffee. How about that?
Boom shakalaka.
Boom shakalaka. So, I would have to go down to Day by Day Catering once every 2 weeks and pick up a check for
$8.
Yeah, it was like, well, that was my tip, right? But then I had to go get my base pay, which was like
$20.
Yeah, it's almost not worth the job, but it was something. But it was hard because I'm a Mason, and that talks, you know what I mean? Like, it's an honor to be included in that organization. It's an organization of presidents and leaders. Right. And in that same very tux that, going through some, ancient rituals, I was getting $8 serving. Right? It was painful. Right?
I can almost see your face catching counting that tip
like
jar.
To serve like 5, 6, 8, 10 people, you know what I mean? Like with a big smile and, shake the drink, put the napkin under it, whatever, and then they look at your tip jar and then walk off. Right. You know what I mean? It was just like, I wanted to jump off a bridge, dude. It was not good. That was about the time we were having a ski
the Black Pass
conversation.
Right.
So after that, I went through like four different go nowhere jobs, right? You know what I mean? Like subsequently. And it was like it was like the hardest sales, for me, the hardest sales time ever, right? Like I took this job with this company where you sold door-to-door chemicals. And I mean, I'd kind of done that in other ways in my past, but
wasn't quite door-to-door.
Not quite door-to-door. It was kind of more like in your living room,
right.
And I was sharing those chemicals with you.
Right.
But this is more like
selling leads.
Lubricants and cleaning supplies to door-to-door to businesses and a place in an environment where nobody was buying anything.
I did that for a minute.
Yeah, and it was just like so. But when I restarted the reincarnation of business again, right? I got the first couple clients. Yeah, last night when we had steak, we were by a few of those clients, right? So I'm probably into like client 6 or 7 or 8 or 10. And one of my clients was right around the corner from Day by Day Catering. So I used to walk by it, look in the window, and be like, don't ever forget. Don't ever forget. So, so when is the transition in the DOD?
I mean, that was all predicated off the housing market crash of 2008, right? I went like, 16 months, maybe 18 months without a job, right? So during that time I was working, that's when I was doing the Census Bureau. I was doing a couple.
Does that even qualify as a job?
No, not really.
Not really.
It was a couple $8 checks.
400 bones.
Yeah, it was basically 400 bones. But so that's where all that started. 2008, when the housing market crashed, I probably put in, when you lose your job or whatever, man, you start throwing resumes out, right? You start trying to find something, just anything, right? And so literally probably 10 months after I sent the resume in, the DOD called. And I literally, when I picked the phone, I was like, who's this? And they were like, this is the Department of Defense. And I'm like, why are you calling me? And they were like, well, we got your resume. I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot I did send a resume in there, right? I went in and interviewed for this job. Worst interview I ever had, right? I walked out of there.
That never stopped anybody in DOD, though.
And, well, I didn't know that at that point, you know what I'm saying? So I walked out pretty disgusted.
What makes you say it was the worst interview you ever had?
The questions that they asked, it was like they were nebulous questions and they didn't really go anywhere. I mean, I literally walked out of that thing.
That sounds like DOD, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, but again, I wasn't affiliated yet, so I didn't know. I was used to regular corporate stuff where it was like they're really trying to figure out who you are, right? They're really trying to kind of
really
dig
care
deep.
in DOD.
In DOD, it's almost like they didn't care. So I walked out of that interview and I called my wife. I called Michelle at that point, and I was like, I don't know if I'm getting this job, man. It's probably the worst interview I ever had. The next day, they called me and like, when do you want to start? It's like, what? Like that was in my head, that was a terrible interview. Like, I'm not even sure I answered like half the questions. I mean, I answered them because they were like so generic.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they didn't probe at all. So I was like, man, these guys aren't probing. They're not leaning in. Right. I don't have what they're looking for. Well, here I am 15, 16, or probably 17 years later. Right. And it's gone very well for me. Very well, but that first interview, man, I was like, there's no way I'm getting this job, dude. No way I'm getting this job.
Would you start as GS what?
Here's a funny story. So when I left Springfield, I was probably about 90 G's a year, and I took this job. There was a couple other little nickel-dime jobs between Garrett Springfield or Landmark Aviation and the DOD, but I took a probably 50% pay cut to take that job. I went from 90 to about 40 because I started as GS7.
Well, you took a 100% pay cut. To get to 45 back. Right?
Well, I mean, if you want to look at it like that, yes.
Look at it like that. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
You didn't really take a pay cut. You took an all cut.
Yeah.
And then,
then started climbing back.
Half beats the hell out of nothing.
Well, and that's what happened. And the thing about the DOD job was it was a dedicated pay increases the first 3 years. All you had to do was make the 365 days, and then you went from GS7 to GS9. Right. 365 days, you go from GS9 to GS11. 365 days, now you can compete for the GS12, right? And I got the GS12 on the first round, and then the next thing would have been the PCO.
So more PCO?
Procurement Contracting Officer. So I actually had the warrants to actually buy stuff. I'm the final sign-off. I am the signature on the procurement or purchase. So I think our limit was, I could sign off on something literally by myself for, I believe, up to about $20 million. But I had the signature, right? So I was actually
the gatekeeper.
I was buying stuff for the Army at that point. I was the guy. And that's where I got into the OTAs. And to be honest with you, when I interviewed for that PCO job, I didn't get it. Right? As you get higher and higher up in the DOD, what happens is everybody that started in the GS 7911 program, we all made it to the 1213 at the same time.
So for everybody that's not familiar, will you explain a little bit about what GS is and what that?
GS is just the general scale. That's basically, if you go look at the GS scale for 2025, it'll tell you how much GS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to GS 13,
so it's basically
14.
Your pay scale.
It's basically the pay scale, correct.
Right. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So let's talk about what your role is like now.
All right.
So currently, what is your position?
Right now, I'm the chief of the Acquisition Management Office for an organization called Ground Vehicle Systems Center. It used to be TARDAC, which was Tank Automotive Armaments Command. That's what we were before that. So 6-7 years, they changed the name, and all the headquarters and everybody changed their name. But basically what I do right now is I manage about 17 individuals, and we're all responsible for different types of procurement for the Army. Right. Some people are FAR-based, which is Federal Acquisition Regulation. It's the regular type of procurement. Some people that I have underneath me are in the Agile world, means they're doing OTAs and CSOs, other transaction authority.
Right, which means?
So that's the military's most recent, fastest way to do procurement. It strips out some of the red tape and bureaucracy from the FAR side, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and makes it into a much more streamlined approach.
Why would you why would OTA be a good thing to do?
Well, I mean, for a bunch of different reasons. I can get stuff in the hands of the warfighter way faster than I can on the, the regular perspective. So that makes it a little bit more speedy or expedient, right? We prototype a little bit faster, a little bit differently. Money's handled a little bit different. Like we're milestone payments instead of, large, like, I need $90 million. I can kind of fund milestones along the way in the OTA so that you can break up your cash a little bit. Right, you don't need $90 million for your entire thing.
Right.
You just have to make sure that you have enough money to fund the next milestone so we can keep it moving. So it basically makes everything a little bit easier and a little bit easier and faster.
So let's talk a little bit about, because you talked about something that we both talk about quite regularly, and that's put it in the hands of the warfighter, right? Is there anything specifically, technology, equipment, something that ended up in the hands of the warfighter? Any specific thing that stands out to you as you were like proud of it, that it was in the hands of the warfighter because you and your team had an element of getting it there? Like, is there like any one piece of equipment where you're like, yeah, boy?
There's actually a few of them, to be honest with you, and there's some that
Which one
haven't actually
stands
made
out?
it. Well, so SMAT, it's actually Squad Multi-Purpose Equipment Transporter. Right, that was us. We had a major hand in that. There's
Now, what's that?
It's basically a unmanned, almost like a 4-wheel type of utility vehicle that's probably about as long as this room. But so after a conflict or while the squad of Army fighters are trying to go from point A to point B, what they do is they can take their stuff and put it on this machine and tell it where to go, and it'll take all their stuff there for them. Right. So they don't have to carry that. You're not rucking that 60 pounds plus all the stuff. You don't have to hump it. Right. Plus it's got, power kickoffs on it. So you like plug in your cell phone, plug in your GPS coordinator, plug in all your stuff.
Was it run off of diesel, electric? What is it?
To be honest, I can't remember what that one actually is off of. I forgot because that was like 4 or 5 years ago.
They're in the field now using them? Yeah.
Yeah, and ISV is another one we did. That'd be, I think it's inter-squad vehicle, but that's basically an infill, exfil vehicle, right? So Special Forces was like, we need a new, Gucci little thingy thing. How about that?
Right, so it's basically like, what do you call it, like a 2+2? But
so that one's going to be, it's either 4 or 6-seater, but almost Razor-ish, but a little bit more beefy than that. That actually came off of technically a regular car chassis concept.
Right. So
we've done trailers, right? So Abrams has Abrams is a heavy tank, and Abrams is a heavy tank. So we had to come up with trailers that could carry the Abrams, and European roads are different than ours.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So the trailer had to have some special stuff built into it. I mean, it's basically like an 18-wheel trailer.
Right. Well, what's a Abrams weighs 71 tons? I think it is.
You're somewhere in there. You're pretty close.
Gotta have some with some beef.
Correct. And the roads. So again, European roads are different than ours. So the weight restrictions are different. The bridges are different, and the thing has to be able to operate on and off road. Right. So I got to be able to take this fat tank and maybe drive it across a 2-track for a couple, 3, 4, 10, 12 miles. Right, to get it back into situ with its team and its owner. You know what I mean? So there's some stupidity involved with that.
So let's talk a little bit about us.
Let's go, baby.
Right.
I've been waiting on that.
So, well, Dave and I are considering what the exit strategy for DOD looks like for him, and some things that, where we can bring value to the post-DOD procurement evolution by helping other organizations navigate their way through connecting to government contracting in the way that's most effective for them. So, but meanwhile, you and I will be continuing to do our get-togethers, our
Leadership Gold.
Leadership Gold, Global Organization for Leadership Development, the thing that we've been doing. Actually, there'll be new dates that'll be releasing for that coming very soon.
Real soon.
And and those are for all walks of life and for all levels of leadership. From entry level to senior leaders, etc. There is no such thing as a stupid question, and there is no such thing as a bad leader, except a leader that's unwilling to learn. So for us, we basically kick it off. We talk about whatever the leadership topic is. We interface with other people to hear what their backgrounds are and what their feelings are about the subjects. And
Right.
we've got some really dynamite feedback from some people that have attended, so I'm really looking forward to see what we do with that. You're doing some consulting for aviation, so you're back to that again.
Yep.
So some leadership training, some org D training, some
little Lean Six Sigma
Lean
ish.
Six Sigma stuff,
Right.
You know what I mean? So Dave's been doing some traveling with some organizations that he's worked with previous, and he and I collaborate on the regular on some things that if nothing else conceptually about what you've got going on that you need a sounding board for, or what I got going on that I need a sounding board for. But
so let me tell you about that leadership stuff, man, because I think it's kind of a cool story of how that started, right? I mean, not the dropping the cash to get in and get all the IP and all that stuff, but the actual getting the first contract. Right. So I'm not historically known for being a business development guy. Right. I'm more the internal ops guy and make the stuff work. But when I jumped into this Maxwell leadership thing, I read a book. It was Ryan Leake, Chasing Failure. And then there was another book, Atomic Habits. I think that's James Clear.
Yeah, I know Clear's book.
Right. So the combination of those two things gave me enough stones to go reach out, because I was literally sitting there thinking all right, now I have all this stuff. I'm pretty good with it. What am I going to do with it to actually make some cash with it? And I think you and I might have had some conversations along the way. But basically, through some of my normal stuff, this morning you were doing a little, what's your program? I forgot the name of it.
Zoom?
Well, you were on Zoom, but who were you watching?
Oh, so that was a recovery group.
There we go.
Right.
I thought it was a specific one, so I was trying to come with the name. But so you were watching your recovery program. I was doing a little bit of Bible study, right? And I think that for me, what's happened is as I've gotten deeper into the Bible study stuff, I've been able to see clearer. I've been able to make better decisions, and I've been able to have that intestinal fortitude to take some of those steps. So not just reading the two books, but having enough faith to say, what am I afraid of, right? What's going to stop me from doing this?
Right.
So basically what happened was between James and Ryan, I figured out that pick up the phone and make a couple calls. What's the worst thing that's going to happen to you, right? So I went back to people, and you've said this to me before, people you know, like, and trust, or people that know, like, and trust you. Right. So I took some of your advice, a little bit from everybody else, right? And I picked the phone and made a call. Called back to Battle Creek, which is where I used to work at. Right, and I called the VPGM, head dude in charge. His name is Andy, and I used to work with him way back in the day when I was there. So he's been there since 2007 or something like that, right? So he's worked his way up the ranks. Long story short, in my conversation with him, he said, you need to catch up with Lincoln. Lincoln's the home office. They handle all the training and everything. Right. So in trying to figure out how to make that connection happen, I realized that a guy that worked for me when I was at Standard Aero is now the avionics manager in Lincoln. So I called Pat. Pat said, oh, you want to talk to the training guy? He happens to be my best friend. We're getting ready to go on a 10-day fishing trip. Let me connect you. So Pat connected me to Lance. Lance called me the next day, and he basically gave me the scenario of what he's looking for.
Right.
They were looking for some leadership training, but more importantly, they were looking for a specific type of trainer. Right? And so what he broke down in that conversation was, we're looking for somebody with prior military. In my head, I was like, check. We're looking for somebody who's come in as a technician and moved up the ranks. Again, I was like, check. And then he said, somebody who has some knowledge of leadership. And I was like, well, we'll put a line through that. I got some skills in that, but it's yet to be proven. You know what I mean? From a training perspective, right? From training someone else. So in my mind, I had 2 3/4 checks out of 3.
Right.
So I said, let's give this thing a whirl, man. I'll come out to Lincoln and let's throw it down. We'll pilot this, see if you like it. We can make some adjustments to it, whatever, and we'll go from there. And so first trip out to Lincoln, Went out there, had Maxwell's Developing the Leader 2.0. I had Leaf. I had Extreme Ownership, right? I had, what was their second book?
What, Beyond Extreme Ownership?
Yeah, they actually did 2 books.
You're talking about
Jocko.
Jocko Willmott.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the second book.
It'll come to us in a second. But long story short, I went out there with like 5 books because I was trying to get them to understand it's a communication piece. It's a connection piece. If you're the leader, you have to delegate, right? You can't micromanage this. You got to kind of let some of that stuff go down and happen and have them run off your intent. They know what you want, but you got to give them the freedom to get to it, right? So I went in there with like 5 books. We did the first pilot program. I went in there with the 5 books, and then what ended up happening was we started talking afterwards, and he was like, I don't know if we need these, right? So we got rid of the 2 Jocko books, which was fine. But then he added some other stuff to it, some other curriculum that was like basic communication. I'm not talking like communication 101, right? Like nonverbals, right? Verbal, like Space Invader, how much is your spacing, right? I mean, all that I call it basic communication stuff. What ended up happening was because I was able to incorporate that stuff into what I was already doing, I ended up taking from Duncan something that they needed to have happen. So in their standard operating procedures, everybody has to get trained on, it's literally basic communication, right? And so when they gave me that piece of the puzzle, what I didn't realize was they were giving me that requirement to basically train 150 people every year. So the front end of it is communication, the front quarter of it's communication, and then the second half of the first day and the whole second day, we're talking about leadership, right? And the other thing that I did in this, and it was, I don't know if it was purely accidental, but it wasn't necessarily like I had planned it. But the way I train this is a little bit different. So what I've learned from one of my Bible study classes is a concept called SOAP, right? So what's the scripture? Then what did you observe from the reading, right? And then the A is, how are you going to apply that? And the P would be, pray about it so that you can put it in play. But basically what I did was when I started training this stuff, I went after that SOAP concept. So I said, here, check it out. I break them into groups, and I tell one group, you guys read this section. Group 2, you read section B. Group 3, you read section C. And then they chop it up in the group, right? So 4 or 5 people talking about a communication topic, similar to what we do in Leadership Gold, right? Give them a little something to think about, let them talk about it for a minute, and then pull the thread. And then what I do is I kind of walk around the classroom while they're talking and see what threads they're pulling. And if they're pulling enough of them, I kind of let it ride. And then we bring the group back together, and each group gets to explain to the rest of the team what they talked about, what they learned from it, and how it connects with them. And what I've learned from that is a lot of people that come in and train, they still do it the old school way, right? Like you're standing at the podium and you're going to talk to these people for 16 hours.
Right. So there's no interactive.
Yeah, and people are like doing touch and goes, bouncing their head off the table. I only use like 2 PowerPoint slides. The rest of it is that broke down small group conversation, right? So that they can get it dialed in the small group and then come out and tell the rest of the group what they learned. It's working super well, man. Super well.
Have you taken some of the things that you've learned from that and taken it back to DOD?
Yes, I have. Slightly different, not quite the same wins, but certainly.
I understand that, but I guess what I'm saying is, the interesting thing is that conversations you and I have, right, lead to things that ultimately influence our experiences back in the organizations that we run.
Correct.
Right? And then, everything's an opportunity to learn, but it doesn't do any good if I learn it and then I don't bring it back to interface it to try and enhance whatever it is I'm working on at any given moment. So, that's played a factor for, some of the things that we've talked about, topics in Leadership Gold.
Yep.
That's been things that, things that DOD related, inform leadership education that happens in the private sector. And then, it would be foolish to think that things that happen in the private sector don't lead back to things that ultimately that are happening within the organization of DOD. And I find at least that, you said something else that's pretty compelling, and that is that, interface with things that are spiritual in nature or, family in nature. And there are also opportunities to be able to enhance our leadership capabilities as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like how I handle my relationship with my son or my wife, or how I handle my relationship with, in recovery with other people that, that mentor me or that I mentor. Or, those all things go back to inform, leadership in my organization, and then leadership in my organization goes to feedback to people who I can help at a ground level with, addiction and post-traumatic stress disorder and some of the other things, some of the other causes that I'm passionate about.
Right.
It was great.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely taking those things back to the DOD. It's kind of a weird scenario because some things I pilot in the DOD and then bring out.
Right.
Other things I pilot outside the DOD and then bring in.
Right.
And see how they work. So, yeah, it's always like an ebb and flow or a push-pull type of situation, right? Anything that I find that has some sort of relatability to what I'm doing, I'm trying to figure out a way to either incorporate that or at least bring that to the attention of the people that work for me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because I'm straight up trying to build leaders so that they can take this over when I leave in 2028.
Right.
Not like I'm counting the days, 23 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There you are. Yeah, you are.
Whatever that is.
Man, that was fucking awesome. So let me run a little back-end recap. So we talked about your past history. We talked about, some of the challenges associated with. We actually went to the edge of the volcano a little bit and walked around it, and toured it. You know what I mean?
We didn't get deep on the edge, though.
Well,
not yet.
What? So here's the thing. So one of the things that we intend to do, and this is something that will be probably part of the highlight reel of this that will go on to. So I've been doing this for a minute now. Right. So I've interviewed other people, and some of the feedback I've gotten really positive feedback from everybody that's been that's been on the show. Of course, I'll likely get positive feedback from this as well, which is a great interview. But what the resounding question that I keep getting asked is, "What about you?" Right? You know what I mean? So my story has some legs. I'm pretty sure. You know what I mean? So we talked about it, over the course of this last few months, and and basically, I like being on this side of the table, right? Maybe it's a control thing. Plus, I built this shit, so
right, it's yours.
Fuck if you don't like it, right? But on the other side, I realized that if we're gonna, go down the path of, sharing my story, I need to be able to, and with a level of authenticity, and also, a level of vulnerability, then I need to have somebody on the other side of the table who understands me at a level that, I can basically, paddle into the wave and share freely, what my past history has been, and the trials and tribulations that brought me through to now. So Dave and I talked about it, and, and basically decided that we would flip seats. So we're going to shoot another episode. The next episode is going to be Dave. Dave's going to interview me. And, that'll be, not necessarily sure exactly where that'll go. But it'll be kind of fun to see where we end up. And, if nothing else, it'll be a learning experience for both of us. So, so Dave and I have this thing that he's been saying to me for 30 years, and it's become part of what we say to each other on the regular now. So he'll say Armstrong, right? And Armstrong is a term that means that, we stay strong in our relationship long term, right? It's a terminology used to articulate the bonding experience that we have. We're basically ride or die, lifelong friends, and that ain't going nowhere. What he doesn't know was there was a cat who was my workout partner in the squadron, and his name was Armstrong, and he was a fucking sweetheart. But he was a, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really have anything negative to say about him, except that, at least in those years, he saw things from a limited capacity. Right. And, so in the beginning, when you used to say Armstrong to me, I'd be like, Armstrong, then I
You
think
thinking that dude?
think of that dude. And I'm still friends with him to this day, and I love him. And he's actually turned into a fucking dynamite human being. So you know what I mean, with faith and a lot of other things. You know what I mean, like, and he was actually, you know, we move a lot of iron back in the day. To this day, he's like, "Cuz you realize," you know, I'm like, "Yeah, dude, we got mad respect in the aft gym on the aircraft carrier. We moved some plates up in that.
The aft gym
For young boys, we got up in there and moved some iron. So, shout out to you, my brother. Love you. So, but we say Armstrong all the time, and you know, and basically what that means is, you know, an articulation of what it's like to have a lifelong friend. And I don't have very many of those, right? Very few.
Fewer and fewer by the years.
So, you know, I love you.
Love you too, cause for sure.
This was awesome.
Yep.
And you know, I think it's going to lend itself pretty good to something that can be shared for inspiration and, you know, and ideas for other people too. So what we usually do at this point is we get a solid fist pound and we do it on the camera over there so you can see that, John. There we go. So there we go. Fucking, you know, Dancing on a Volcano, episode 8 or episode 1, season 2. Dave Daniels and Dino, a.k.a. or Jimmy DiNardo, a.k.a. Dino. So love you, man.
Love you too, cause.